Good morning. We have about 40 ladies gone on ladies' retreat, so I thought it was a good time to preach a manly sermon. I just figured that would fit in pretty well. The main reason for preaching a manly sermon today, and grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ as I begin, is that there's some things in this morning's sermon that Marlene doesn't need to hear. So when I say a manly sermon, I don't mean that it's macho in any way. I mean it's fairly self-revealing. Sometimes men are not intelligent. Marlene doesn't need to know that. Y'all don't tell her. Be sure you keep that to yourself. Sometimes men don't do wise things. Sometimes men say silly words that don't help at all. My life is much better when I'm very simple and very transparent. It's when we begin to become wordy or we begin to embellish in any way or we begin to make it about us. And none of you other guys would do that. I'm just talking to myself this morning. I mean, just preaching to me. But that's when we sort of start to get in trouble. And we say things that don't help the situation and they don't make anything healthier. And they oftentimes sort of get to a point where they harm us and hurt us. Now we're going to talk about King Saul, and I hope all of you will find chapter 14 of 1 Samuel. And it is a great chapter. We're going to read most of it here in a moment. But King Saul is the first king of Israel. Samuel was the last judge. He was a prophet, and he also was a priest. And he is the one that God comes to and says, don't worry, they haven't rejected you. They've rejected me, but I want you to go ahead and give the people the king they've been wanting. And so Saul is selected. Saul, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. And he's head and shoulders above anyone else. He's a tall, good-looking guy. Looks like he ought to be president, right? That's who he looks like. But the day of his coronation, they can't find him. And he's actually hiding among the baggage. Now, baggage was fairly common then when you have all these military things going on and people traveling so much. There's a baggage keeper, and there was a place where lots of baggage was stored. And when it comes time for Saul to become king, he's hiding in the baggage. And God has this person chosen now that he actually has to change his heart before he can be king. We sort of worry about him, don't we? If God had to change him already, we have this fellow, this man who's going to try to be the first king of Israel. And God has to sort of transform his heart, actually puts him among the prophets and has to have him recognized in some odd ways with a military victory finally. And everybody sort of says, hey, Saul's our king. He'll be a good one. But the people were demanding a king, not God. At the end of Judges, it simply says 5 times, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, which was not a good commentary for having a king. It was a bad commentary on everybody doing what they wanted to do. So now we're going to get this man who's going to help us figure out how to be better. He's going to make us better. And Saul becomes this man in our manly sermon. God gives him victories, and then he does crazy things. He's going to go into battle, and it's time for the battle, and Samuel is a little late. So Saul assumes, hey, I better make the burnt sacrifice myself. I'd hate to go into battle without God. And so he makes the burnt offering. Now, it's a fluid situation. There's a fluid status going on in Israel because Eli is prophet, judge, and priest. He does those things, but Saul is going to be the king. Should the king do priestly things? Does he have access to God in that way? And Saul sort of assumes that he does, but every time that we guys assume something, we usually get in trouble. He should have stopped and asked a question. He should have paused. Dad, sometimes in your house, you need to pause. To be a good leader, you need to think just for a moment, wait a minute, where is what I am about to do and say going to take my family? What are the implications going to be? What will it look like if this ultimatum is actually declared and I have to follow through on it? Y'all remember Jephthah, one of those earlier judges? Everything's going good for Jephthah, battle's going. Hey, the very first thing that comes out of my house, I'll sacrifice to the Lord. And his virgin daughter walks out. Dads don't always think and do wise things. Sometimes the maleness in us, there was no reason to say that, no reason for it at all. And Saul is going to say some things that there's no reason for them to be said. They sound good. They sound like a man would say them, but not a godly man. And a lot of times in our house, we have to stop before we try to lead our family and say, wait a minute, is this something a man would say or a godly man would say? Is this going to go where I need to go, or is this going to put a burden where it doesn't belong? So Saul is going to fall in that category in this chapter. I just wanted to give you that pre-word so you can begin to see that Saul finds himself there. And then we got another man in the story who doesn't communicate either. His name is Jonathan. This is Saul's son. Communication is not a male, well, I don't know that we're good at it, right? Either we talk too much or not enough. Marlene would say, I talk way too much. She knows everything I think and feel and ever felt or thought. And sometimes she says, just be quiet. And other wives sit there and say, my husband never tells me anything. He's a closed book. I can't read him. I don't know what he means. I don't know how he thinks. He just goes off and does stuff. I can't figure him out. Somewhere in the middle is where a manly sermon should be preached. Now, Jonathan's going to be our hero in the story, but Jonathan's going to be our hero not because he communicates so well, but because he is controlled by God so well. Saul is not so controlled by God. Saul seems to have trouble figuring out the role of God in the life of the new king in Israel. And Jonathan just sort of gets tired of sitting on his hands and saying, do we have a do something God or a do nothing God? If we've got to do something God, let's do something. And so if you have a husband who at some point out of his faith says, we have a do something God, let's do something in our family, then at least rejoice for that, even if he's not communicating to you all the ways that you might like him to. Just stop for a moment and say, praise God that I have a husband or a spouse who has a do something God and is going to follow them. So that's a long setup to a long read, but it's a great story. 1 Samuel 14. Now the day came that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who was carrying his armor, come and let us cross over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he did not tell his father. First communication breakdown. We'll have to ask later whether it was wisdom or not that kept him from talking to Saul. Saul was staying at the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree, which is in Migron. And the people who were with him were about 600 men. And Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the priest of the Lord at Shiloh, was wearing an ephod. And the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. Learn from that verse. There is a priest present, and the people don't know that Jonathan is gone either. Verse 4, between the passes by which Jonathan sought to cross over to the Philistine garrison, there was a sharp crag on the one side and a sharp crag on the other side. And the name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other was Seneh. The one crag rose on the north opposite Michmash, and the other on the south opposite Geba. Then Jonathan said to the young man who was carrying his armor, come and let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us. There's some good faith there. Jonathan is stepping out. We don't have any word that God tells him, go get him, Jonathan. Jonathan takes his armor bearer behind him. And the last thing in the chapter before this was that they didn't have any swords, that the Philistines had all of the blacksmiths down in Philistia. And so the Israelites are without swords. So Jonathan has this armor bearer with him, and Jonathan evidently has a rare sword. And they're going to go and check out the Philistines. He says, perhaps the Lord will work for us. The Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. Our God is a great God. He looks his armor bearer in the eye and sings that little song, right? The battle belongs to the Lord. He has that confidence and that faith. His armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart. Turn yourself, and here I am with you according to your desire. Then Jonathan said, behold, we will cross over to the men and reveal ourselves to them. If they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hands, and this shall be the sign to us. Now, who told Jonathan that was the sign from the Lord? God didn't say anything. There's a gap in the text. Jonathan is acting on faith, and he puts his armor bearer and he says, here's how we're going to act. If we get over there and we say, here we are, and they say, come up to us, we're going to take that as the sign from God that we're going to have victory. A man walking by faith, looking for God in his life. Now that's a manly sermon worth having. I hope all of you are men who walk by faith and are looking for God in your life. That's where Jonathan is, and his armor bearer is faithful. Well, the story goes on. In verse 11, when both of them revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines said, behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. So the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us and we will tell you something. And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel. Let's sick them. God's already committed. He's on our side. Let's go. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm going into battle, I want to be in an airplane looking down on everyone else. If I'm going into battle, I want the high ground. I don't want the low ground where the only way to get from here to the ones that I have made up my mind God has given me is to crawl hand over hand. Hands and feet, crawling on all fours. That's a pretty vulnerable way to go into battle if you'll think about it. I mean, you're having to climb this sharp crag and your armor bearer's right behind you, and the only way you can get up it is hand over hand, foot over foot. You don't have any way to defend yourself, to protect yourself. But up goes Jonathan. He says, come up, we'll tell you something. Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel. Verse 13, then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet with his armor bearer behind him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer put some to death after him. The first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within a half a furrow in an acre of land, and there was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. Even the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it became a great trembling. All right, now we're going to show up for battle. We've called on God. We've asked God. God is not constrained to win by many or by few. The minute that we get there and they say, come up to us, God has given them to us, and he starts to climb and the ground starts to tremble. And the God of earthquakes puts to flight the Philistine army. And they are fleeing and scattering. And now we see Saul's ineptness. Look what happens in verse 16. Saul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin looked. Behold, the multitude melted away. And they went here and there. And Saul said to the people who were with him, "Number now and see who has gone from us." And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Then Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God here," for the ark of God was at that time with the sons of Israel. All right, get the ark in here. Let's find out. Let's get God on our side. You know, sometimes I go visit the hospital and I don't always pray. Sometimes I find myself in a situation and I don't always pray. Sometimes prayer is rude. Sometimes prayer is inappropriate. Now, usually prayer works very well. I'm not saying that I shouldn't pray. I'm just saying there are moments when you get there and it's not the right time for prayer. The rudest thing you can do is get 10 grandkids to say, "Oh, y'all, just come gather around Granddad's bed. Everybody be quiet for a minute and let's pray," while they're busy telling essential stories. Now, that would be rude, wouldn't it? Well, Saul finds himself in a rude place with God. A rude place. Saul said, verse 18, "Bring the ark of God here," for the ark of God was at that time with the sons of Israel. While Saul talked to the priest, the commotion in the camp of the Philistines continued and increased. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." All right, they're getting ready to make this sacrifice. They're getting ready to call on God to figure out what God wants, what God's doing. And the noise outside and the commotion is so bad that they finally look out the window and they say, "Let's go. It's too late to ask God." And this is where that foolish manliness sort of came in. He'd already been in trouble for not asking God before. And he's trying to do something smart. And instead of looking out and seeing that God's already at work and getting in with God, he's trying to have a moment of worship. And he said, "No, that's past. It's not time to make sacrifice now. Let's get on with the battle." So they get on with the battle. He says in verse 20, "Then Saul said to Saul and all the people who were with him rallied, came to the battle. Behold, every man's sword was against his fellow. There was very great confusion. Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously." I don't know if they've been captured or if they got hungry and knew the Philistines would take them as prisoners of war and feed them. But there are a bunch of Hebrews that are with the Philistines already. Now here's what happens. Verse 21, "Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously, who went up with them, also turned around in the camp. Even they also turned to be with Israel, who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines had fled, even they also pursued them closely in the battle." All right, I've got one guy that's willing to go fight, and he starts to have a battle, and the earthquake starts to come, and the enemy starts to flee, and pretty soon Dad has to get on board, and there's not even time to make a sacrifice. And now those that were with the Philistines are turning around and fighting, and now those in the holes in the grounds are coming up, and they're fighting, all because one fella said, "The Lord is not constrained to save by many or by few. Perhaps the Lord will work with us. Maybe he'll use me to do what needs to be done." And dads in your house, maybe that's the only thing you need to pray before your family. "Lord, use me to do what needs to be done in the moment it needs to be done, with the simplest, transparent life that I can offer to you and my family. Keep me from evil things, keep me from extra things, and focus me on the important thing." All Israel now has joined in with Jonathan. So it tells us here in verse 23, "When the Lord delivered Israel that day, and the battle spread beyond Beth-aven." Now, the men of Israel were hard pressed on that day, for Saul had put the people under oath, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food before evening until I have avenged myself on my enemies." Sometimes men say stupid things. It had nothing to do with battle. It had nothing. He puts everybody under the curse. Until I have avenged myself. He makes it all about him instead of about God. Instead of saying for God and for Israel and going to battle, he says anybody that eats anything today, well, military runs on its stomach, and they've fought as long as they can fight. Well, look how it works out. He said, unless I have avenged myself on my enemies. So none of the people tasted food. All the people of the land entered the forest, and there was honey on the ground. Honey on the ground. When the people entered the forest, behold, there was a flow of honey. You know, I always heard about the land flowing with milk and honey. That Israel's going to be given the land flowing with milk and honey. It really happened. The land is flowing with honey. We're worried about our honeybees, right? We're doing all we can to stop some of the pesticides that keep killing all the insects, including the bees, so we can have pollination and honey. Our world is really pretty dependent upon bees right now. They had so many bees in Israel that they have this place in the forest where so much honey is produced that it's running on the ground. It's flowing on the ground. A land flowing with honey. Well, verse 27, Jonathan had not heard when his father put the people under oath. Therefore, he put the end of his staff that was in his hand, dipped it in the honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. A land flowing with honey. I could sure use a snack right now. I could sure use just a taste. Just a taste of honey would mean so much. And so he just takes his staff and dips it in the honey and tastes that, and he's revived. Boy, it's a powerful thing. It was a powerful moment. When Jonathan heard, verse 27, but Jonathan had not heard when his father put the people under the ban, and so he took that and his eyes brightened. 28, then one of the people said, your father strictly put the people under oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food today. And the people were weary. Then Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See now how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little of this honey. How much more if only the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies, which they found. For now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been great. If my dad hadn't spoken so foolishly, we could have had a great victory. My dad is the one that gave a manly word that wasn't helpful at all. Maybe you've made an ultimatum at some point in your life that you wish you could take back. I'm not saying there's no place for an ultimatum, but a lot of times it's those ultimatums that get us in trouble, where we think we've acted so wisely on behalf of our family, and then we find out, wait a minute, that scuffle at school wasn't about defending me, it was about defending an innocent that couldn't defend themselves. And your ultimatum made it impossible to take back or to move to another place. You froze yourself. And Saul made a terrible ultimatum. Don't eat anything. So the army got weak and didn't have total victory. Verse 31, they struck among the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, and the people were very weary. The people rushed greedily upon the spoil, took sheep and oxen and calves and slew them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. They were so hungry, they're eating raw food. Now they're down to the point where, all right, we came to the end of this battle here, and not only are we eating, but we're eating raw animals. Wow, that's gross. That's where they are. Then Saul said, verse 33, behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. And he said, you have acted treacherously. Roll a great stone to me today. Saul said, disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, each of you bring me his ox or his sheep and slaughter it here and eat. And do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood. So all the people that night brought each one his ox with him and slaughtered it there. And Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar that he had built to the Lord. Then Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and take spoil among them until the morning light. and let us not leave a man of them. And they said, do whatever seems good to you. So the priest said, let us draw near to God here. All right, let's stop and ask God before we go any further. Let's find out. Saul inquired of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel? But he did not answer him on that day. Sometimes, dads, we get disconnected from God by the actions we take, the leadership that we have. And it looks like we're doing well, but we're really doing selfishly, or we're really doing arrogantly, or we're really making it about us. And he comes along and he has to get there and say, hey, it is time for us to just pause. God doesn't show up. At least the priest is smart enough to know when God doesn't show up, it means something. Saul said, draw near here, all you chiefs and the people, and investigate and see how this sin has happened today. For as the Lord lives who delivers Israel, though it is in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But not one of the people answered him. Then he said to all Israel, you shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side. And the people said to Saul, do what seems good to you. Therefore Saul said to the Lord, the God of Israel, give a perfect lot. That means show us whose fault this is. And Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people escaped. Saul said, cast lots between me and Jonathan my son. And Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you've done. So Jonathan told him and said, I indeed tasted a little honey with the end of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am, I must die. Saul said, may God do this to me and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan. This day is a mess because it is a poorly communicated, manly sermon. Where is God in all of this? What's God been doing? And Saul sounds like he's in the right here. And ignorance is no excuse for violating the law. Jonathan didn't hear what his dad said. He was off beating up the Philistines. He was off making that statement, perhaps the Lord will work for us. He's not constrained to save by many or by few. And our hero becomes our victim. And our inept king becomes the voice of leadership. Well, actually, no. Our inept king becomes even more inept. He's already had the kingdom rejected from him. It's been pulled from him. Samuel had already told him that. Because he had rejected God on the other occasion and made the sacrifice. So he loses face at another significant level. Any of you dreading the next 2 years of political ads about who's going to be president? Don't start already. Oh, they've already started. I don't know that we have anyone that should be president. I'm going to vote. Bethany, would you take? I'm going to vote for Bethany and let Bethany be president. Everybody write her in. I think that's the wisest thing we can do. Well, here's what happens here. Here's how the king comes off in this. In verse 43. Well, make it 45. The people said to Saul, must Jonathan die, who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Far from it. The populace is going to speak up now. Should Jonathan really die for what he did? He didn't hear you say it, and he's been leading the victory. And now you made an ignorant word, and as the head of your household, the head of our nation, the head of our family, you've made this ultimatum that has cursed us rather than blessed us. You're the problem, Saul, not the answer, the people say. He brought about this great deliverance in Israel. Far from it, as the Lord lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Oh, by the way, Saul's not done with this, right? The Philistines stay a thorn in the side. It's not very long until Goliath is 40 days, 40 nights across the veil. Every morning he gets up and says, hey, send someone to fight with me. And again, Saul is frozen until that little guy named David shows up with a rock. Saul continues his habit, his practice. He never does become the man we want him to be. He never does become the godly man. Maybe in your house, you've never been the man you wanted to be. You've been the man of the house, but not the godly man of the house. Our ladies on retreat, they need to hear from us. We want to be the godly men of the house that act by faith, even if we don't communicate always. We always trust in God and follow Him. We're looking for His signs in our life. And if that trickles down to you, then we'll all be blessed. That's what we want from our elders, isn't it? We don't want them to always know where we're going. We want them to always follow God where He's leading us. And us stand here as people and say, we don't know where God is going. And they say, we're following God. He'll take us there. That's what we need to hear from each other. And wives, you can tell your husband, I just thank you so much for following Jesus. Thank you for following Him faithfully. Husbands, have you said ignorant ultimatum things that weren't transparent and didn't help the situation at all? All because of your pride? Let it go. Be more like Jonathan than Saul, even though Jonathan is the cause of God not giving an answer that day. Jonathan is also the reason that God gave victory that day, because he stood up and did something for God. Here's your take home. Takes it a little while to come up. I built it a little bit slowly, so it comes out slowly. Have you ever regretted an ultimatum you made? Have the pride to look at your family and say, I'm sorry I said that. I should have never made that word. You shouldn't have been grounded for that. Your kids will love you for it, and they'll accept all the groundings they deserve, right? I mean, because they got plenty they deserve to be grounded for, but they got that one where you didn't have all the facts. You made an ultimatum anyway. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have been grounded for that. Or that argument with your wife. That didn't mean anything. It wasn't important. You have to be careful when you say that. Make sure it's not important to her. Sometimes we need to say, no, that was more important than I made it. Just communicate. But then wise men allow simple speech to communicate healthily. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. Just say yes or no. People can deal with the simple fact of the matter, of the truth of the matter in a powerful way. Saul and Jonathan, interesting folks that God used in His kingdom. Saul is really the illustration of we don't know what role God is going to have in Israel. And he demonstrates that. Don't be the dad in your home that says, I don't know where God fits in our house. You be the one that says, God sits on the throne in our house, and we will follow Him. Together we stand and sing.